this whole area is in shadow. Basically, there are some streaks of light on the shirt here. So basically, I would lose all the drawing from here. Well, basically from here to here. And the only definite shapes I would see are this light shape here that I would leave on the shirt. Those aren't really very important for the portrait, right? So maybe this is a better example of what kind of information you can get with just two values. This shape here, which is clearly like a baby in direct light, even though you just have simple value masses of dark and light. But in here you can basically just get a silhouette. So I think it's better to kind of try to maintain a little bit more information. Now I'm repeating myself here a little bit, so let's move to the next thing. And I'm losing a bit the drawing on the ear, so let's kind of try to find that again. Place the earlobe on the right spot. I think that's pretty much enough for the placement. So it doesn't have to be very distinct and outlined, but just kind of some separation. So, you know, the marker for me to go from when we proceed. Okay, and let's try to re-establish these kind of landmarks we put in here before we blurred everything out. It's kind of the bridge of the nose casting a shadow here. Place a mark, check if it looks right. Maybe we can go a bit further up with that one. Like this bridge is actually pretty narrow in the picture. And then we can see, for example, how the brow continues here. The shadow is kind of continuing towards there, so we can safely extend that a bit towards this way. And maybe then by wiping the brush, we can actually kind of take a little bit of the darker stuff out. Instead of using the eraser, which would leave a light value there, we can just blur out the darker stuff with the brush and kind of soften things and keep them kind of loose there. But just some information for us to go from. Just gonna reinforce the drawing of the nose a little bit. I feel it's somehow gotten a bit lost. The outline was looking very thick, so I kind of went in and took a bit off. Now here we're actually getting to the point where you can see like maybe there's a little bit too much of the paint on the surface. So it's getting hard to make these soft marks. So I actually have to use quite a bit of the, you know, it's not really leaving a darker mark here very easily. It kind of wipes things off there. So maybe I'll just take this dry brush and kind of try to get rid of most of the paint there so we can be left with this tone. And then try to go in with a slightly darker tone again. So that's one way you can control the amount of paint on the surface. If you start getting too much, and it gets harder to control, because we're kind of, as I said, at some point maybe this is kind of like, it should feel a bit like charcoal drawing almost. Maybe not at this stage anymore, but where you can just push, pull, and erase easily, and all the things like that. So now we still have this other eyelid here. It's not very accurate mark here, so let's maybe notch that a little bit, and then stick the other eyelid. And yeah, I don't really like this stuff that's going on here, so let's just try to kind of, I went a bit overboard with that, so that's looking a bit better. What I'm noticing now is maybe the nose is a little bit too long. I'm not sure. I think I need to carve this ball of the nose a little bit like this. And it's already looking a little bit more like the person. All right, great. So yeah, I think it's time for another break now. Okay, coming back from the break again. Took a walk with my dog and had some lunch. And now I have fresh eyes. It was a longer break. So first I noticed this forehead is too short. It's like this distance is too narrow basically, or too, I don't know how you say. Like we need to make it taller, I think. So let's try something like this. And one way to notice it is again going to look for the shapes, and this light shape is not matching what I see on the photo. So let's make it right. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. All right. That's looking a little bit better. So thinking we can actually just kind of go ahead and tone the shirt pretty much one value. Just grab a bit more paint. Just get scrubbing. Maybe we'll actually reinforce the tones here a little bit. So there's a bit more separation. And from here we can just keep scrubbing. Now a negative with this technique, of course, when you're kind of just toning things in by scrubbing, you have to keep in mind ergonomy. Use your whole hand, you know, different kinds of movements, not just single repetitive strokes, because you can get strain injuries like that. And ask me how I know. So better keep that in mind as well. So try to kind of switch it up. That's part of the reason why lately I've been more into like using mediums when painting. It's like I can skip this scrubby stage. And some people, even using this technique, do kind of add a bit of solvent to ease the process here. Thing is, like after you use a bit of solvent at this stage, then you probably want to let it dry, or at least like firm up, tack up, whatever you want to say, so you can actually work it again. Because if you have solvent on there, or medium, oil-based, alcohol-based, whatever you're using, then it's gonna like slip around probably quite a bit. And erasing and redrawing is gonna be a lot harder. So that's why I prefer to do it this way. Definitely not for every painting I make, because this does take quite a bit of time, but it's very, very controllable. So precision here is key in a portrait. So yeah, I think this approach is the best way for this project. Now, I talked about other approaches like mass drawing and alla prima, and yeah, different alla prima approaches like the one with the turpentine or odorless mineral spirits drawing and then kind of filling large color spaces, and then the mass drawing with the cow video and all that sort of stuff. They're all different ways to approach paintings. I mean, even if you don't actually take this further into like a fully opaque painting, covering up all this is still like a nice image you can create with this technique. One thing you can then do after this stage is start applying, you know, whites for the lights. You can also scrub white, maybe just, you know, tint it slightly with raw umber or some warm color, so it's not like shining cool. And then you can, you know, put highlights as pure white. And that should create a nice effect. There's quite a few paintings and drawings I've seen like that. You almost call them drawings because, you know, that's essentially what you're doing. I should probably use a bigger brush for this, but it's kind of meditative, something. Kind of enjoyable to just, you know, take your time and scrub it in. Now, we used to do this in figure class, so there's an obvious time limit there since the poses last only so long, and we gotta get the drawing really accurate before we can proceed. So we kind of were in a rush to tone things in and get moving with the drawing, but now that I'm doing it in my home, I think this process is really nice. Just work it at my own pace. I should probably do like a figure painting demonstration, or at least paint one for my own practice and fun, just to see what I can do at home in my studio without, you know, the time pressure. Now this soft brush leaves you softer marks and, you know, more hazy kind of finish, but you can also do this with a bristle brush. It will scrub more of the paint off when you scrub like this, and the brushes wear down really quickly. Like, this is not a cheap brush, but I think it's kind of at the point of its career where I can start using it for stuff like this. since it doesn't really hold its shape that well, it has these splayed hairs. You can't, I mean, loading with paint, it still kind of holds shape and everything, but it's not like a really delightful tool to use at this point if you're looking for precision. So, and they're meant for use, so I think it's good for this job. If you're doing this at home, then, think carefully which brush you use, since I can show you how the brushes end up, which is like this used to be a fully long bristle brush, but it's been worn out by scrubbing onto the painting surface like this. And this is something I can use now for like an eraser brush, basically. So I dip it into mineral spirits and wipe most of it off. Some remains, and then I can just go over previous lines and scrub it off. Like right here, now the paint is wet, this brush is dry, so I can kind of carve the lines as well. So this can also be used for drawing, but I mean, yeah, it's not ideal to use for drawing in my opinion anymore, because it kind of creates these harsh marks if you try to apply paint with it. So the soft one is better for this. And as I tone this in, you start noticing it's actually turning into an image out of this abstract stuff that's been kind of floating around these lines and soft things, and I think it's starting to look kind of pleasant. And at this point, you can be fairly happy with what you're getting. So, like right now, it feels like it's going in the right direction. So I'm kind of excited to work more on this painting. I'll just wipe out some of the lights on the shirt here now, just to create some, more interesting value patterns, not just all the same dark. So there's obviously a lot of like darks to map out in here also, but we'll see if I get to those. The reason I want to wipe these are because I want to get this kind of sleeve here also in the light. I hope I don't block the camera too often. It's kind of hard because the table is in the way, so I can't move it more towards the side or closer, or I'll bump into it. Or I should rearrange the atelier or something, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not too worried about this edge in the picture. It's all pretty dark values here, so I don't mind losing this edge here. It was just helpful to draw it so I can actually address the proportions and everything like that. Well, that's pretty dark. There's too much paint on there, so let's just kind of blur it out a little bit. We don't want anything like really thick dark marks at this stage. In general, you want to keep your darks fairly flat. I mean, that's the kind of the dogma that is going around. The reason for that is because if you have paint texture in the shadows, they actually catch physical light on your painting when, there is a huge ridge of paint here. It is shiny at the end, especially after you varnish the painting. It will catch light, and at that point it will look really weird if you have like a huge ridge of paint in the darkest spot and it actually appears lighter because of that. And there can be multiple ridges if you're using like bristle brushes or something like that, where they leave brush strokes. So at least at this stage, you want to be mindful of stuff like that. We actually in school, well, when painting opaquely, not at this stage, we used fan brushes to even out the texture of the paint after working the darks. In lights, that's fine, you want your lights to catch light. But I think the historical reason for this whole thing is because they used to use lead white, and it's a lot less tinting than titanium white, so you had to use a lot more paint in order to lighten things up, if that's the way you approach mixing color. So essentially, the lighter something got, the more paint you had to add to it, and lead white is somewhat stiff, so it tended to form these ridges and textures. And a lot of painters still use lead white because it has this unique texture and it's quite archival, so it actually is really resistant to to cracking and all that sort of stuff. So, and doesn't really change color so much. It yellows a bit, so that's not great. But yeah, I mean, the obvious reason not to use lead white is the toxicity stuff. Not just because, you know, if you get it on your in your system somehow, ingesting, breathing pigment if you make it that way, or you know, have it on your fingers and eat a sandwich or something like that, then that's obviously bad. But also like the environmental effects, you don't want to wash down like lead paint down your sink when you're painting. Not really great for the environment. So that's mainly the reason. I'm confident I could paint with lead paint without, you know, having it go in my system, but you know, kind of don't wanna give any more reason to use lead in this world. In the past decades, we've gotten rid of it mostly with legislation, but I don't want to contribute to adding more lead in whatever, you know, our water resources, or, you know, I don't know. How they process those things is unknown to me, so I don't know if it's an issue or not, but rather just use titanium white. It's also a lot cheaper, so there's that. Now there's this weird texture bit here. No, maybe it's from the priming or something. So let's just get rid of that. As I said, you know, we don't want, if I notice something like that, there's like this weird glob of texture. Maybe it's the acrylic primer that, and I missed that part when sanding. We don't want those things catching too much light. It's a very minor thing, but if we plan to spend like, I don't know, 30 hours for this painting, and you notice something at this very early stage, then why on earth would you not address that at this point? So I was planning to make the upper area of the painting slightly darker. I kind of want to draw the edge of the couch here. Keep it somewhat consistent, you know, throughout the painting. Doesn't have to be like fully level. It's, you know, it's a fabric lined pillow essentially that's we're seeing there, you know, the edge of the sofa, couch, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, doesn't have to be like a straight line made with a straight edge or something like that, but instead we just want to kind of have something that is believable there. So I'm just gonna like really roughly tone this stuff, scrub it. This kind of goes against, you know, me saying I want to just keep it to 3 values. It's not going to be as dark as the shadows, but I just kind of want some atmospheric stuff going on here. This is also partly because the commissioner of this painting also requested that maybe it would be cool to have a little bit of you know, openness to the painting. Don't have to cover everything with paint, so it looks like painting more. They actually liked this self-portrait of mine, where I did the vignette thing, you know, didn't go all the way to the edges and instead kind of left things open and had this dark background. Technique I'm gonna approach this commission painting is gonna be similar as for this, so I'm gonna go monochrome and then add color in a layer afterwards. But I guess you'll see if I release these demonstrations at some point. So yeah, I'm kind of planning ahead for the background, so maybe I can leave some of this painterly stuff in the background. Now this is really just scrubbing on there. Maybe for this I could actually use the bristle brush here. I can just demonstrate, like, it makes a slightly different mark, you know, more contrasty. But you can really like abuse this brush because it's just so stiff, you know. You can just push the entire easel with these brush tips. So my only concern is, like, I don't want to scrub off, you know, the primer of the canvas with this brush. So since it is really truly very coarse. And you see, as I'm abusing this painting like this, you know, really using force, maybe you can appreciate my setup where I drilled these bits, all these screws in here, and having these screws actually they have a really nice solid grip on the painting, so it's really, really nice and rigid. And I can get all the way to the edges of the painting, and they don't really cast distracting shadows over the image. So I really like using this easel like this. This is something I saw Aaron Westerberg do in some of his painting videos, Instagram videos or pictures. I can't remember where I picked it up from, but it was Aaron Westerberg who I saw this doing this with his easel. And yeah, it's really, really convenient. He usually paints on panels, so that's probably where it comes from. You know, if you take the panel from here, move it all the way over here, then you're gonna have this in the way basically. And yeah, it's annoying. This whole area is now in shadow. You can't really see what you're doing there. Or if you move it up front, then you're gonna miss out on the front edge here. And also it's not gonna be very stable. Like it's gonna slip back if you use a bit of force, and it's wobbly and super annoying. So yeah, anyone looking at this video and struggling with this issue, I recommend highly you do this screw thing. It's really, really stable. I mean, I've gone as far as painted like 50 by 70 centimeters panels using these 4 screws with this same easel, and yeah, it's very solid. No issues there. Yeah, I think we're kind of approaching the stage where we should probably start articulating. And I'm not sure how like strictly I'm gonna go with the articulation here. Maybe I'll do a little bit for the demonstration purpose, but I kind of want to keep it this loose painterly, loose, not painterly, but atmospheric kind of drawing. I mean, it feels accurate to me looking at my reference. But yeah, maybe I'll actually grab a smaller brush now, something fairly accurate, and start going over the lines. If I can find a suitable one, that is. And yeah, I really need new small brushes. So yeah, I just have this thing now. Not exactly a great tip, you know, it's all splayed out. All my small brushes are like this.